Market reaction from the USDA's WASD report, and yet we are going to talk about the South American crop and several other issues, including the US planting, right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So our guest today is Gidel. As every week, he comments on several market issues. So, what did you think of the USDA was the report? Everything unchanged. That was what the market expected, but well, we had a choppy week again.
Exactly. Well, interestingly enough, the analytical community, which I'm a part of, if you want to say that, and that is was anticipating like the USDA has done in the past of being relatively modest or very limited changes. Part of this because of the fact that South America's crop sizes are still being finalized. In this case, this year we're actually later than ever. And then, of course, when the U.S. domestic demand type situations, they are a little bit up in the air here. We don't get a good update on that until we get this quarterly stocks at the end of this month on the 31st. So that possibility. But the problem is that people also anticipate the fact that we see these exports going very strong. The latest numbers here through yesterday were down under, 30 million on sales for the rest of the year. Unheard of kind of numbers here. We're with half the year to go on soybeans. Corn numbers actually some good, some bad. There overall though, it's very tight supply potential there, and of course. We're constantly watching to see how the world utilizes the Black Sea and wheat and things of that nature. But it turns out that there was kind of ultimately there was kind of a slight up in on the wheat numbers, a slight down on beans and corn, and turns out the USDA came in unchanged, which isn't all that much different. But there's always a feeling, well, why didn't they do this or whatever? And also, the speculative community doesn't always look at fundamentals all that closely, and so there wasn't any kind of positive fundamental or positive reactions to the report. So that caused some profit taking, and then this week's export sales were kind of mixed at this point. The biggest problem right now is that we've had such great soybean exports here on average weekly. We don't need to sell huge amounts here, but the problem is that the market's used to seeing big numbers, so that means it's depressed and it's no good. And so that's another feature we got to deal with here is people's expectations of what foreign demand will be in the second half of this year after the huge first half numbers. Probably has to be moderated some in that. And at this point, there's still a possibility the USDA's estimates are going to be too short. And we'll find that out either in April or May as how things in South America really shake out.
Yes, this unusual demand on this at this time of the year could be partly explained by the logistical problems in Brazil, but perhaps this demand would continue because of the lack of quality of the grains in Brazil.
Oh, I agree that the issues that are impacting Brazil's soybean harvest at this point is causing lots of issues from the standpoint of the, they talk about humidity in the soybeans. That to me is the moisture content that's in the soybeans down there. It's that's highly unusual, the situations that Mato Grosso is going through right now. They just do not have the type of infrastructure to handle a wet harvest like it looks like it. They have had rains in the past, that kind of stuff, but they're not basically at this point, the ground's saturated. The rains that come now just continue to keep high humidity there. The producers want to get it out of the field because it doesn't want it to rot. It's a mess down there. And then on top of it is the transportation and logistics you talked about at ports and things like that. Everything's slowed down. This week's harvest numbers, we went from like 81 to 88% I'll take that back. Actually, I think that was just quoting you the corn harvest numbers. And at this point, we went from 69% to 81% on soybean harvest, and that's still substantially behind the 95% type of number we have this time of year. And so there's definitely plenty of soybeans. Back to the scenario, that issues on South America is also probably, in my opinion, causing a bigger havoc for the Brazilian export corn supplies, because Mato Grosso and the output they produce up in the northern parts of Brazil is where all the export corn comes from. And it really puts, right now we should be, anything after kind of the 1st of March is really pressing your luck on what kind of yields you're going to have. I know that there's some encouragements we should plant more corn right now than they originally had thought up there. But the other side of the coin, if you're a producer in Brazil and you say, God, I'm 2 weeks behind past the perfect date, I'm going to spend more money and maybe not get any return on it, because all of a sudden early May, the dry season shows up and I only got some burnt crop in Mato Grosso. So it's a real twisty scenario at this point as to what kind of potential is down there. But at this point, it's not in front of us. And so the market is still trying to figure out how that's all happened. And the fact that, surprisingly, sometimes the old classic is you plant in the dust and bands will bust. In this case, it's too much rain. And in essence, that means you're going to potentially have issues about weather in Mato Grosso, and it might turn out to be better than you think. So that's the other issue that we just constantly battle in the agricultural world, is that weather can be a fickle friend to your agricultural production.
Yes, one controversial thing is the size of the Brazilian and the Argentine crop. A lot of institutions took too long to recognize that the Argentinian crop would be reduced. And guess what? I think that's going to happen the same with the Brazilian crop. And the funds bought the supersized crop in South America. What are the consequences of that, in your opinion?
Well, I think, that was kind of the reaction we got here from the U.S. Holding their production estimates there. And then our friends at ConnectedFarmer, the USDA of Brazil, they went ahead and increased their production number on corn by 2.5 to 3 million. And on beans, they also increased that 1.5 to 2. And so, the institutional side of this thing is, it's got the old game of rain makes grain. That makes sense to a point. But I've seen too many problems where sometimes rain does not turn into more grain. So that definitely is a vulnerable situation. And then you also mentioned what's happened over there in Argentina. The dryness that has, we had this rain that happened in late January, early February, I should say. But we had dryness before it. We've had dryness since then. We've had some heat. Now there's some light showers around that impacted Cordoba here overnight. But the real talk is that next week's rain is going to be the savior. And that on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, somewhere in there, there's going to be a good sizable rain coming up. And that's going to make everything. And I agree, it's going to help stabilize things. I just don't know how much more we can bounce back from that, because the fact that even Buenos Aires, the exchange down there, went ahead and sliced 2 million off their soybean number down to 45. They took 1 million off their corn down to 46 million metric tons. those are numbers that were over 50 here back this last fall when everybody was optimistic about the crops down there. Now, if that comes about, plus we have the issues maybe come in here and change Brazil, and the final crop sizes, instead of being, those 134, 35 number, it turns out to be 130 on soybeans. That's going to make things interesting. There's no doubt about it. But unfortunately, those are not numbers right in front of us. The same thing on corn. Probably the corn number, by the way. They're talking this 108, 109. Wow, a number under 100 million would definitely start to shake the crowd up. But, that's the delicate world we're in agriculture. The next rain is always the most important one.
The consultancy that spoke about a crop of 130 million metric tons in Brazil was Safra Sem Mercado. But I would like to ask you if you think that it's corn that gains momentum right now with this likely delay for the second corn crop in Brazil. Do you think that corn is gaining momentum?
Well, I think corn is definitely going to be watched closely here. And to some extent, if you kind of look at the last month or so, corn's reactions haven't been as deep on setbacks as maybe the beans have. Today we took beans down below $14 here on the May contract, which is kind of the lead important one in the U.S. right now. And then for the percentage basis in that, the corn has stayed closer to it, primarily because I think the one thing that had been in back of everybody's mind has been the dryness in the U.S., particularly starting at the Missouri River or the western U.S. plains and farther west, and the fact that a situation in corn could have a pretty significant impact on yields. Dryness in corn can be a lot more impactful. Soybeans have a ability in the U.S. at least to hang back and wait for some rains. It's not as easy to do that in corn. But the wildest thing we got going right now in the U.S. forecast is the fact that after significant dryness the USDA, the National Weather Service is projecting a pretty significant snow event in Colorado and, anywhere from 2 to 4 inches, maybe higher in rains all the way from Oklahoma to South Dakota, and maybe as far east as western Iowa and Missouri. We're getting some rains this way too, but the Eastern Corn Belt has had a few rains before this, so the drought monitor and the dryness was really centered on the U.S. plains, and to some extent that wasn't a big deal for much of this U.S. agriculture because that was wheat country, but it has significantly changed over the last 15, 20 years, all the way from the Canadian border to the Texas border. There's a lot more corn and soybeans in that world, particularly Kansas, South Dakota. Those areas in North Dakota have put in significant amount of feed grains and oil seeds. And so that's highly important for us to on our total production capability, with those new states really providing a huge amount of supplies to the U.S. output.
And what the input purchases right now is telling us about the crop?
Well, from the standpoint of the latest kind of numbers we got from the industry outlook, the Ag Outlook Forum, and that as we look into those general numbers, the idea of we're starting with 140 million on corn, and also on soybeans we're 140 million on beans, and 1.5 million or so on corn, is the fact that we really probably need some more acres. Now, how many more acres can we get? That's the thing. We've already significantly increased the last year's numbers, and a lot of that's coming from the prevent planting side of this whole thing, but it looks like to me that looking at the S&D numbers here, that we need at least another 1 million acres of beans and at least 500,000 more acres of corn. Now, that all gets back to what kind of impact we have on South America and how many bushels they have or don't have down there, and because the world is zero-sum situation. If South America doesn't have it, they're going to look to the U.S. If the U.S. doesn't have it, like we didn't have this last fall, they look to South America, and we've been back and forth in this whole thing for the last I'd have to say, if you think about it, the last 12 months we've had quite a seesaw scenario. The U.S. was going to plant a lot of stuff last spring, and then it didn't plant as much because of economics, and South America had a pretty good sized crop, but then all of a sudden the U.S. crop wasn't there. So now all of a sudden we're worried about the South American crop and the Southern Hemisphere output in general. And so that's the whole thing we got to deal with. Look at it right now, and those kind of numbers I think are going to needed to drive this thing. I think the market could be even being trying to encourage people to put those additional acres in between now and the end of the month. But I think that, along with our updates here, looking at the South American crop sizes, are going to be the factors here as we go forward into the next 2 to 4 weeks. And then surprisingly here, once you get into April in the U.S., there's going to be people out there planting someplace. This depends on if it's too wet in the Eastern Corn Belt, maybe it'll be just right in the West. Or maybe it'll be right now, the Delta in the Southeast really needs to dry out, because that's usually where the first part of U.S. corn plantings are every year.
Seems that the USDA is boosting anxiety until the next report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's the unknowns out there are definitely providing it. Actually, one of the interesting things that come up today was the Brazilian ag minister says, well, geez, this is getting a little tough here on on this corn crop. We're not getting it in. He says this might cause the prices to go higher. You don't normally see that from an official around the world. I don't care if you're in the Brazil or US or whatever. That isn't usually the kind of commentary you get from the person in front of the microphone. They tend to try to be quiet, or at least calm about the world. There's always a good thing around the corner, but I'm not sure that there is lots of uncertainty at this point, and so hopefully uncertainty creates things. And the one thing we don't want to forget about this popped up on us here, and it's kind of snuck up on me myself, is the fact that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange has got permission from the U.S. Commodity Trading Commission to expand the limits for investors, and then primarily the commodity funds. And they've been the feature in this market and driving these prices up since last August and September, in the fact that they've looked at issues and the technicals and the conditions, and they've put a significant amount of positions on. But they got to the point where they couldn't put the positions on because they were at the maximum level. And so the CME got permission to expand that level. I think I've heard it was double the level it is before. So that's going to make things even more interesting as to the volatility. It can help us on the way up. It can also create a lot of excitement on the down. So we got lots of things happening for us in the probably the next until we get the U.S. crop pretty well understood at this point, which is July or August. We've still got some quite volatile markets here and on a worldwide basis for corn, soybeans, and wheat.
I almost forgot to mention the African Swine Fever. There are news of new outbreaks in China every week. And it seems like very similar to the coronavirus, that you see more mutations, and this is never over. So, what do you think is going?
Yeah, Louis, I'm shaking my head exactly with you in this thing. It's an interesting situation. I have to say that I kind of feel like that the feed demands issue on this whole thing, and that's really, to me, it's probably the most important factor in this thing, is soybean meal demand and soybeans in general. I think that that the Chinese demand for oil seeds in general is going to hang in there, even if we have some ups and downs on output of pork in that, because of the fact that they need the soybean oil just as much as they need the meal internally. And at the same time, they could be looking at some other alternative situations. There's definitely some indications. That's something we didn't mention here from the USDA. They on Tuesday this week, they went ahead and increased China's wheat feeding number another 5 million metric tons. So that's taken a little of the edge off of the corn demand that China might be using. And you picked out a good point that Dalian, their hog prices and meal prices took a real slip here when there was reports about additional African swine fever. So we've got things coming at us from all different areas in different directions, and we got to keep our head on a swivel here to try to figure out exactly which one's coming at us at each time. But that's another feature. I kind of hope, or I don't anticipate it to be a big factor in China's demand for soybeans and soybean meal. It could be a factor potentially on corn demand longer term, but I think that the key question right now on the world basis is what kind of size of crop we're going to have in South America on corn. And I think that's wide open right now. We've still got a lot of things to talk about there.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, Jerry Gidel. Again, very bright.
You bet. Always good to talk with you, Louis. And we'll see how the world thinks of this whole thing a week from today.